Good day, brothers and sisters in Christ. My name is Cecelia McCain, and I'm really happy to be able to be given this opportunity to share my reflections on this week's Lenten challenge. Just a caveat, I tend to analyze my verses according to what sticks out to me and how they're grouped, and sometimes I might contextualize them with music. And so I'm giving that as a caveat as to how I analyze today. Similarly, I also tend to write notes, and so if you see me looking off screen, I'm looking at my notes, so bear with me. I'll start off today's reflection with the saying that giving yourself up for something is never usually easy, especially when it's something that you don't see yourself benefiting from, especially when you realize that you're not benefiting from it. Giving up yourself, sacrificing for that thing is not usually easy, but things change, people change, your opinions change, and Christ is, especially within our context, the force that usually enacts this change. And you see that coming out in the first Bible passage, which is Philippians 3 verses 4b to 14. Paul, who used to be Saul, the same Saul who was going through and persecuting people of Christ, and on the way to Damascus, he was blinded by Christ, and the only way that he could, gain back his sight is if he allowed himself to let go and to trust God and to actually try and seek God's forgiveness of his sins, right? And he speaks about that throughout that entire passage, with the ending being the most important. Paul becomes Paul after he experiences his crucible moment with God. John 12 verses 1 to 8 follows Martha, Mary, and Jesus right before Passover at Lazarus' house. And dinner was being served by the sisters at their homestead. And the story, or the passage, follows Mary prioritizing Jesus over serving dinner, and Martha being resentful of the fact that Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet and wash his feet with expensive perfume. And Jesus comes to the defense of Mary, actually, and says that the poor will always be there, the hungry will always be there, but they will not always have time with him. And in his rebuke of Martha and protection of Mary, you're seeing where he's happy that she's prioritizing him, and it comes across as encouragement for us to continue to prioritize him, because trouble will always be there, things will always need to be done, but Christ loves that in a world full of distraction, we're still able to find time to prioritize him, and I think that's really important. The third verse is the third passage is Isaiah 50 verses 4b to 9a, and the speaker recounts his obedience despite ridicule and hardship, and he states explicitly that he is vindicated by God, who values his obedience, and for that he will gladly turn his other cheek, gladly receive the ridicule of others, knowing that he will never be put to shame because of the God that he serves. The focal verses for this is 7 to 9, and the passage highlights that the path to renewal is not easy, but through obedience and trust in Christ, we can withstand all things. It might feel hard in the moment, definitely, but looking back on it, you can definitely see where God was holding us up. God was carrying us through. Then we have Psalm 31 verses 9 to 16, which follows the lamentation of the slave. And he regales the reader with all of his woes, the suffering, and the punishment that he undergoes. But at verse 14, there's a hopeful change in his dialogue where he says, "But I trust in you, Lord." And then he goes on to plead to Christ to deliver him from his enemies. This verse highlights to me that our trust and faith in God will carry us through any and all hardship. You can see here that that particular passage is quite similar to Isaiah 50 in the sense that the speaker is talking about their trust and belief in Christ and their ability to give up control to him, understanding that God is in control in these circumstances, especially in spaces that you understand that you don't have any control over it. Lastly, second to last and last, of course, first being Philippians 2 verses 5 to 11, and then the last being Luke 19 verses 28 to 40. Philippians calls us not to be haughty, but to humble ourselves and submit to Christ, for that behavior will be highly rewarded. It's very easy, especially in this day and age where pride is something that people grapple with all the time. It's easy for you to compare or to try and push yourself up to the same level as, and this particular verse warns us against putting ourselves on the same level as God and understanding that we need to be humble. And once you adopt that humbleness, for this you'll be highly rewarded, as it says. And Luke 19 verses 28 to 40, I think, is a culmination of all of these verses, but you're following Jesus as he's completing these activities. So during that passage, that would have been Palm Sunday. They are walking through the city. The people of the city are lining the streets with palms, and he's riding through on a donkey. And he is presented as the king, of course, but normally kings would ride on a horse, but he's instead riding on a humble donkey. It shows that Jesus is willing to be humble, is willing to obey God's law, he's willing to give up control, he's willing to sacrifice for the sake of what God's plan is. And I think that that is the culmination of this week's Lenten reading, that we are being asked to allow transformation to happen to ourselves by giving up control, by sacrificing, by being obedient, by prioritizing Christ. All of these things will definitely help us as we continue to walk along this journey. Thank you for having me, and I hope you have a blessed day.